The air pressure inside the fuselage seemed to deepen, weighted by unspoken judgment. Outside, the endless pale blue sky of the transcontinental crossing offered no solace, only the steady hum of the engines. Passengers settled into their routine of luxury and dismissal, oblivious to the fact that the most powerful entities in the nation were about to pivot their entire operational command based on the silent occupant of seat 22C. She was sleeping, or perhaps pretending to sleep, her head slumped against the window, her attire broadcasting destitution. But then a sharp, dissonant sound ripped through the aircraft's intercom, severing the smooth cruise. The captain's voice, usually a soothing cadence of corporate assurance, was tight, laced with immediate visceral panic. "Folks, we've received an unidentified warning signal. Please remain calm." The cabin froze, a shared breath held in terror. And in the sudden, terrifying silence, the woman in the faded garment opened her eyes. They were dark and steady, utterly undisturbed by the rising chaos. A fraction of a moment later, she leaned forward and whispered, a sound barely audible above the rising murmur of fear. "Not terrorists. They're here for me." The flight was a standard commercial run, traveling from the bustling hub of Viridia to the political center of Capitoline, packed with individuals who, by their own assessment, were unquestionably important. In seat 22C, the woman named Serafina was trying to disappear. She was 29 years old, and her dark hair was pulled back into a messy, unremarkable ponytail. She wore no makeup, presenting a face that deliberately asked for no attention whatsoever. Her attire was a uniform of studied anonymity, a gray hoodie worn thin at the elbows, jeans patched with faded blue, and scuffed sneakers with laces that were visibly frayed. Close to her chest, she clutched a small, worn fabric tote bag, as if it were the solitary anchor tethering her to the world. The cabin was a showcase of material success. Silas, a businessman maybe 45, draped in a perfectly tailored suit that suggested Wall Street pedigree, watched Serafina with unconcealed disdain. He caught the eye of Marcus, a slick-haired finance bro seated beside him. Silas didn't lower his voice as he sneered. "This airline has truly lowered its standards. Anyone can get on now," dismissing Serafina as a worthless nobody. Marcus, adjusting the glint of his cufflinks, muttered a cynical retort. "Bet she used her last dime for that seat." The chatter, the sharp side glances, all conspired to make her feel like a smudge on their perfect little world. A few rows ahead, the scene was being documented. Brielle, an influencer in her early 20s with glossy highlights, had her expensive phone glued to her hand. She was live-streaming to her thousands of followers, thriving on the attention. "Guys, look at seat 22C, she giggled, angling her camera to capture Serafina. "Does she even know where she is? Total bargain bin vibes." Her live chat immediately exploded with laughing emojis, and the snickers rippled through the cabin. The judgment continued, sharp and escalating. Isadora, a corporate consultant in her mid-30s, sat a few seats away. She carried herself with an air of absolute certainty, her posture perfect, her nails meticulously manicured. She leaned toward her colleague, Julian, a balding man in a pinstriped suit, ensuring her voice carried. "I bet she's one of those charity cases the airline lets on for PR," Isadora declared. A few passengers smirked and nodded in agreement. She flipped her hair, her earrings catching the overhead lights, and added, "It's almost offensive sitting here with us." Serafina's fingers tightened slightly on the zipper of her tote, but she didn't look up, maintaining the illusion of deep sleep. The disdain was echoed by an older couple, Sylvie and Alistair, seated across the aisle in expensive designer clothes. Sylvie's diamond bracelet glittered every time she moved, while Alistair compulsively checked his phone, likely tracking his stock portfolio. "She really doesn't belong here," Sylvie pronounced loudly. Alistair, without looking up, added, "Probably got on the wrong flight," and they shared a superior chuckle. Even the crew participated in the atmosphere of dismissal. Devlin, a flight attendant, tall, with a buzz cut and a conspicuously straight name tag, walked by. He set a plastic cup of water on Serafina's tray table, slamming it down with unnecessary force. His glare communicated clearly that she was a nuisance, a nobody taking up valuable space. Serafina's hand shifted slightly, just brushing the cup, but her eyes remained closed, the judgment settling over her like accumulating dust. The plane cruised steadily, 35,000 feet above the earth, the sky outside an endless pale blue. The routine shattered without warning. The captain's voice broke through the speaker system. "Folks, we've received an unidentified warning signal. Please remain calm." A heartbeat of silence was instantly replaced by an explosion of nervous chaos. People craned their necks, pressing their faces to the windows, frantically filming the mundane clouds with their phones as if they held an answer. A man shouted, "Is it terrorists?" His voice cracking, and panic began to spread fast. Silas gripped his armrest, already muttering threats about suing the airline. Brielle zoomed in on the chaos, whispering dramatically to her live stream. "This is wild, you guys, what's happening?" Sylvie clutched Alistair's arm, her diamond bracelet digging painfully into his wrist. "We should have taken the jet," she hissed, utterly terrified. It was in this moment of collective terror that Serafina finally opened her eyes. They were dark, piercing, and intensely steady, reflecting a calm born of having weathered far worse storms. She leaned forward just a fraction, her soft voice cutting through the rising tide of fear. "Not terrorists," she whispered. "They're here for me." Silas heard her. He spun around, his face flushed scarlet. "Who do you think you are saying stuff like that?" he boomed, immediately pulling every eye in the cabin back to her. Brielle's camera swung wildly to capture the commotion. Her sharp giggle cut through the air. "Oh my God, she's lost it." An older woman, Margaret, in a cashmere sweater, sitting 2 rows ahead, turned around. She possessed the kind of authority that made others defer. "Don't stir trouble, dear," she advised, her voice sickeningly sweet but icy cold. "Just sit down and be quiet." Even the group of frat guys in the back, all in matching hoodies, joined in, filming the spectacle. "Crazy lady in 22C, I see," one yelled, and they burst into cruel laughter. Devlin, the flight attendant, strode over, his jaw tight with frustration. "Ma'am, stay quiet or we'll report you to security when we land," he stated, his tone final, treating her as a solved problem. The cabin roared with renewed laughter, feeding off the moment and turning Serafina into the collective joke. Vincent, a man in a tailored blazer, likely a tech executive, leaned over from the row behind her. He had a smug grin, the kind earned from years of closing successful deals. "You know, if you're going to make up stories, at least dress the part," he said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. He gestured mockingly at her gray hoodie and scuffed sneakers, presenting them as irrefutable evidence of her lack of worth. Serafina's fingers curled slightly around her tote, but her face remained impassive, her eyes fixed on the window. The laughter swelled into a wave of agreement, reinforcing the passengers' collective decision that she was nothing more than a punchline. Vincent's grin widened. He leaned back and whispered something to the woman next to him, who responded with a sharp, grating laugh. Serafina didn't flinch, her gaze moving slowly until it locked onto Devlin's eyes for a brief, intense second. "Report me," she said. 2 words, soft but lethally clear, like a blade slipping through silk. The laughter momentarily stumbled. Devlin blinked, startled, then muttered something about protocol before quickly turning away. The cabin settled slightly, but the tension hung heavy. People continued to glance at her, waiting for her to break. She leaned back, closing her eyes again, her tote clutched close. A few moments later, Lucinda, a PR executive in a bright red coat, stood up to stretch. She glanced at Serafina, her lips curling into a sneer. "Some people shouldn't be allowed in public," she announced, ensuring her voice carried. She adjusted her coat, showcasing the designer label, and tossed her hair. "It's embarrassing for the rest of us," she concluded. Serafina's hand paused mid-motion on her tote strap, but she offered no response, allowing the cabin's collective judgment to wrap around her, daring her to react. Then it came. A low, guttural roar that was fundamentally different from the steady vibration of the commercial jet's engines. Heads whipped toward the windows. Two F-22 Raptors, sleek, gray and razor-sharp, sliced through the sky. They were so close that the terrified passengers could clearly distinguish the rivets on their wings. Screams erupted. Fighter jets! Brielle's phone shook violently as she zoomed in. Her live stream now exploding with frantic comments. The frat guys were pressed against the glass, one yelling, "This is some action movie shit." Sylvie grabbed Alistair's hand, her voice trembling. "What is this? What's happening?" Silas was already furiously typing on his phone, drafting an email to the airline demanding an explanation. Devlin froze in the aisle, his radio sputtering uselessly. Serafina opened her eyes slowly this time. She looked out the window, her lips slightly parted in a quiet breath. The massive, lethal jets moved with a familiar rhythm, their pattern steady and precise, like a heartbeat she hadn't felt in years. A few rows back, Wallace, an old man in a worn jacket, a veteran whose hands now shook from age but whose eyes missed nothing, adjusted his glasses. He squinted hard at the jets. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice low but potent, carrying a weight of disbelief and understanding. "That's the president's escort squad." The cabin was now a desperate mix of panic and utter awe. Maya, a teenage girl with dangling earbuds, turned to her mother, Carol. "Mom, why is everyone freaking out about her?" Maya asked impatiently, pointing at Serafina. "She's just some random. This is so stupid." Carol, looking tired, shushed her but added dismissively, "She's probably just confused, honey. Let it go." Maya rolled her eyes and snapped a photo of Serafina for her group chat, captioning it, "Weirdo in 22C. Silas, fueled by panic and pride, stood up, his face crimson. He pointed directly at Serafina. "Don't tell me you honestly think those fighters are here for you," he mocked. Marcus, the finance bro, joined in, smirking. 22C thinks she's Top Gun." The frat guys howled, mimicking jets swooping through the air. Devlin stepped forward again, blocking her path to the aisle. "Sit down immediately." His voice was now frantic, bordering on desperation. Serafina ignored him. Her movement was slow, deliberate, and careful. She reached into her small fabric tote. She pulled out a silver metal tag, small, no bigger than a keychain, but polished enough to fiercely catch the cabin light. Engraved on its surface were the words, "Shadow Talon 7. The cabin, focused on the spectacle, didn't see the tag yet, but Wallace did. His hands gripped his armrests, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. The laughter died down, replaced by nervous murmuring. Brandon, a real estate agent in a golf shirt and a knockoff Rolex, leaned forward, dripping sarcasm. "Oh, come on. What's next? You going to tell us you're a secret agent?" He chuckled, looking around for validation. "Some people will say anything for attention," he added loudly. Serafina's fingers brushed the edges of the tag, measuring the weight of his words, but she offered no response. Her gaze remained fixed on the window where the F-22s flew, steady and utterly unyielding. She stood, ignoring Devlin's increasingly panicked presence, and walked slowly toward the emergency radio near the galley. Every single eye followed her movement. Brielle's live stream was chaos. "What's she doing? This is fake, right?" Serafina pressed the radio's button. Her voice was steady, calm, cutting through the thick silence like a shot. "This is Shadow Talon 7 Charlie requesting acknowledgement." Outside, the two F-22s tipped their wings in a sharp, deliberate salute. Phones dropped from nerveless hands. Brielle's stream froze, her mouth hanging open. Wallace's voice broke the quiet, trembling with reverence and disbelief. "My God! Shadow Talon was reported Kia 7 years ago." Serafina stood tall, her hand pressed over her heart, her fingers clenched tightly around the silver tag. She didn't turn to face the stunned, horrified passengers. Her eyes stayed locked on the vast sky. Camilla, a journalist in the front row, stood up, her notepad out, her pen shaking violently. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice loud but unsteady. "You can't just walk onto a plane looking like that and expect us to believe you're some war hero." Her words were a desperate attempt to rally the cabin's doubt. Camilla scribbled frantically, trying to write her way out of the unfolding reality. But the F-22s remained fixed in position, cutting through the air, a silent, undeniable answer to Camilla's skepticism. The cabin was collapsing into a mess of whispers and gasps. Teresa, a lawyer in a sharp blazer, was almost screaming, trying to convince herself. "No. This must be staged." The frat guys muttered, shame replacing their laughter. How could someone dress like that be a legend? The air was thick, like everyone was holding their breath. Howard, a CEO in a gray suit, leaned forward. His voice low but sharp, clinging to the last shred of mockery. "If you're so important, why does your bag look like it came from a dumpster?" He pointed at her worn tote, convinced he had found the fatal flaw in her story. Howard leaned back, his cuff links glinting, and looked around for support. "This is just some PR stunt, isn't it?" Serafina's hand paused on the worn fabric of her tote strap, but she didn't look at him. Her focus remained on the jets, whose visible presence was a louder, more absolute truth than his mocking questions. Then came a roar, deeper and utterly unmistakable. Air Force One broke through the clouds. Its majestic blue and white body gleamed, the seal of the nation sharp against the sky. The radio crackled, loud and gloriously clear. "Shadow Talon 7, welcome back. We owe you everything." Passengers gasped. Some sobbed. Brielle's phone slipped forgotten to the floor. The frat guys were silent. Silas's face turned pale. His half-written email forgotten. Wallace was weeping quietly, tears streaming down his face. Serafina raised her hand, a slow, reverent salute to the sky. Her eyes blazed with something fierce and fully alive. The commercial plane gently banked, seamlessly following Air Force One's lead, the F-22s tightening their protective formation. Giselle, a young mother with a toddler asleep in her lap, looked at Serafina, her eyes wide and pleading. "Is it true?" she whispered, desperate for confirmation. "Are you really her?" Serafina turned just enough to meet Giselle's gaze. Her smile was minuscule, faint, but immensely warm, like a quiet promise. "I'm just Serafina," she said, her voice steady. "But I flew for you." Giselle's eyes welled with tears, and she instinctively hugged her son tighter. The doubt was fading, replaced by a heavy, profound reality. Tom, a reporter in a wrinkled button-down, stood up, his voice shaking. "If you're Shadow Talon, why sit here like an ordinary passenger?" It wasn't an accusation, but a desperate need to make sense of the overwhelming moment. "I chose to disappear," Serafina stated, her voice quiet but landing with the weight of a physical blow. "But if the sky calls, I'm still Shadow Talon." Jenna, a younger flight attendant, approached tentatively, her hands fidgeting with her apron, her face flushed with genuine remorse. "Ma'am, I didn't know," she stammered, looking at the floor. "Can I get you anything? Water? A blanket?" It was a small, honest offer, a crack in the cabin's wall of prior judgment. Serafina looked at Jenna, her eyes softening for the first time. "I'm fine," she said gently but firmly. The applause started, slow at first, then rapidly roared through the cabin. People were standing, some crying, some just staring at her, finally seeing her true measure. Brielle remained frozen, her phone abandoned on the floor. Silas sank low into his seat, his expensive watch suddenly appearing absurdly large on his wrist. Devlin stepped back, his face burning red, his communication radio now silent. Serafina ignored the ovation. She simply sat back down in 22C, her tote in her lap, her eyes focused calmly on the window. Her flight was now escorted by the most powerful aircraft in the world. Jeff, a salesman in a polo shirt, his face crimson with frustration, stood up, determined to cling to his fading skepticism. "This doesn't add up," he insisted, cutting through the applause. "If you're some big hero, why didn't you say something earlier?" Why let us think? He trailed off, gesturing wildly. Serafina didn't look at him. She adjusted her tote, her fingers briefly brushing the zipper, and provided her final word on the matter. I don't owe you my story. Her calm certainty silenced Jeff mid-sentence. Years ago she had been someone else. A young woman in a crisp uniform, hair tight under a flight helmet. She had been Shadow Talon 7, one of the finest pilots the Air Force had ever known. She had flown a critical mission protecting the president, taking a devastating hit that should have killed her. The official report read Kia, and she chose to let the world believe it. She walked away from the fame, the medals, and the intense life, opting instead for quiet anonymity, a woman in a faded hoodie, invisible to the rushing world. The only lingering hint of her past was a creased, worn photo in her tote, a younger Serafina in uniform next to a tall, quiet man with steady eyes. Her husband, Elias. Tobias, a grad student a few rows back, stood up, holding a textbook, his voice shaking but clear. I read about Shadow Talon in school, he said, holding up a history of military aviation. They said she saved the president. They said she died. His eyes were locked on Serafina, seeing a legend materialize before him. The cabin's applause softened into a murmuring awe as Tobias sat down, his book still open to her page. The plane landed in Capitoline. The tarmac had transformed into a whirlwind circus, news vans, flashing cameras, and reporters shouting. Serafina stepped onto the pavement, her hoodie still frayed, her scuffed sneakers meeting the ground. She didn't stop for the press, didn't answer the shouts. She walked, her tote slung over her shoulder, her pace even and purposeful. Behind her, the consequences began to rain down. Silas received a phone call just moments after landing. His face drained of all color. Fired, he said loudly, stunned. His company's largest client was, unbeknownst to him, connected to Serafina's powerful family. One silent word, though she never uttered it, and he was professionally finished. Brielle's live stream clips of her mocking the hero went instantly viral, but in the worst way. Her followers turned on her viciously. By the next morning, her sponsorships were gone, and her comment section was filled with hate. Teresa, the lawyer, tried a hasty public relations move, posting an online apology, but it was too late. Her firm publicly dropped her, citing unprofessional conduct. The frat guys deleted their humiliating videos, but alumni who saw the clips ensured their fraternity's social media was suspended. Devlin was reassigned to permanent ground duty, his name whispered in airline circles as the staff member who had threatened a national hero. Isadora, the corporate consultant, found her latest critical deal abruptly cancelled after her client cited severe reputational concerns. Lucinda's PR firm immediately issued a statement distancing themselves from her, and her social media feed went silent. It wasn't noisy or dramatic. The consequences simply fell like heavy, inevitable rain. Serafina didn't witness any of it. She was already walking through the terminal, her worn tote swinging lightly at her side. Then her husband, Elias, arrived. The crowd, which had been buzzing and shouting, silently parted for him. Elias wore a plain jacket, no tie, but his presence commanded absolute authority. People froze. Silas looked quickly away, his hands visibly shaking. Brielle dropped her phone again, her face flushed. Teresa stammered, trying desperately to apologize, but Elias simply acknowledged her with a nod and kept walking toward his wife. He reached Serafina, and she looked up at him, her steady eyes softening immediately. He didn't embrace her or make a scene. He simply stood beside her, his hand lightly brushing hers. The air felt heavier, as if the space itself recognized their combined presence. A security guard, Mike, a burly man with a nervous but deeply respectful demeanor, approached them. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "we've got a car waiting for you. Orders from the top." He gestured toward a black SUV outside, its windows tinted, a driver standing at attention. The crowd watched in hushed silence, some filming, their voices quieter now, as if they were witnessing something sacred. Mike held the door open, his hand slightly trembling, and Serafina stepped inside without uttering a single word. Her steps were as steady as they had ever been. She never needed rescuing. She had walked through their laughter, their cruel words, and their aggressive doubt, emerging victorious not because she fought back or sought validation, but simply because her inherent truth was more than enough. The headlines screamed about the mystery passenger in 22C, about the unprecedented salute from Air Force One, about a hero who was lost and then found. Serafina didn't read them. She was already moving forward, her tote resting on her shoulder, her husband Elias at her side, walking into a world that had finally truly seen her.